10 signs your relationship is ending, even if she stays. Not every relationship ends with a breakup. Some relationships end quietly, while both people are still physically present. There is no final conversation, no clear moment where everything changes. Instead, it happens gradually, in small shifts that are easy to ignore at first. The energy changes. The effort changes. The connection that once felt natural starts to feel forced. And the most confusing part is that she is still there. She still replies, still shows up sometimes, still plays her role on the surface. But deep down, something feels different. This is where many people get stuck. Because as long as she hasn't left, you convince yourself that the relationship is still alive. But presence is not the same as connection. Someone can stay in your life and still be emotionally gone. And if you don't recognize the signs early, you will continue investing in something that is no longer growing, only slowly fading. These signs are not about assumptions or overthinking. They're about patterns. Because when a relationship is ending, the patterns always change before the situation becomes obvious. 1. Conversations feel forced instead of natural. At the beginning, conversations flowed without effort. You didn't have to think about what to say, and even small topics felt engaging. But now it feels like work. For example, you find yourself starting conversations just to keep things alive, asking questions just to avoid silence, and still getting short or delayed responses. In real life, this might look like you texting something thoughtful and receiving a simple okay or LOL without any effort to continue the conversation. When you call, the conversation feels dry, like both of you are just filling time rather than genuinely connecting. Over time, this creates a sense of distance, even though communication still exists. 2. She becomes emotionally distant, even when she's with you. One of the clearest signs is when physical presence no longer matches emotional presence. For example, you can be sitting together, maybe watching something or spending time in the same space, but it feels like she is mentally somewhere else. In real life, she might be on her phone most of the time, not engaging in meaningful conversation or responding without real interest. Even when you try to connect, the response feels flat or distracted. You are together, but it feels like you are alone. 3. Problems are ignored instead of resolved. Every relationship has issues, but what keeps it strong is the effort to solve them. When a relationship is ending, that effort disappears. For example, when something goes wrong and you try to talk about it, she avoids the conversation, changes the topic, or gives vague responses like, "It's fine," without actually addressing the issue. In real life, arguments don't lead to understanding anymore. They just fade away without resolution, only to repeat later. This creates a cycle where nothing improves and the same problems keep coming back. 4. She stops asking about your life. Interest shows through curiosity. When someone cares, they want to know what's happening in your world. When that curiosity disappears, it's a strong sign of emotional withdrawal. For example, she used to ask about your day, your plans, or your goals. Now, those questions are gone. In real life, you might share something important, and instead of follow-up questions or engagement, you get a short response that ends the conversation. Over time, you realize that she is no longer invested in understanding you. 5. Physical affection decreases noticeably. Physical closeness is often a reflection of emotional closeness. When the emotional connection weakens, physical affection usually fades as well. For example, things like hugging, holding hands, or sitting close become less frequent. In real life, she may pull away slightly when you try to be affectionate, or she simply doesn't initiate any physical closeness anymore. Even small gestures that used to feel natural start to disappear, creating a subtle but noticeable distance. 6. She prioritizes everything else over you. When a relationship matters, it is given time and attention. When it starts to fade, it becomes something that fits into whatever time is left. For example, she is always busy, work, friends, social media, other activities, and you're no longer a priority. In real life, plans with you are easily canceled or postponed, but plans with others are maintained. You begin to feel like you are fitting into her schedule instead of being part of it. 7. She avoids serious or deep conversations. Deep conversations require emotional investment. When she avoids them, it often means she is no longer willing to engage on that level. For example, when you try to talk about the relationship or where things are going, she keeps things vague or changes the topic. In real life, you might say, "We need to talk about us," and she responds with something like, "Let's not make it complicated." This avoidance prevents clarity and keeps the situation unclear. 8. You feel like an option instead of a priority. There's a noticeable shift in how you are treated. You no longer feel important or chosen. For example, she engages when it suits her, but not consistently. In real life, she may ignore your messages for hours but be active elsewhere, or only respond when she feels like it. You start to notice that your presence is no longer valued the same way, and that uncertainty begins to affect how you feel. 9. The relationship feels like routine, not connection. Everything starts to feel predictable in a way that lacks emotion. You still talk, you still see each other, but it feels like habit instead of genuine interest. For example, conversations follow the same pattern every day without depth or excitement. In real life, you may realize that you're interacting out of routine, not because there is real engagement or curiosity. The connection feels empty even though the structure is still there. 10. You feel it, but you keep hoping it's not true. Before anything becomes clear, there's always a feeling. Something feels off, even if you cannot fully explain it. For example, you notice the changes, the distance, the lack of effort, but you keep telling yourself it's temporary. In real life, you make excuses for her behavior, hoping things will go back to how they were. But deep down, you know something has changed. At the end of the day, a relationship does not end the moment someone leaves. It ends when the connection, effort, and emotional presence begin to disappear. And what makes this situation difficult is that it creates confusion, because everything still looks normal on the surface, but feels completely different underneath. You're still talking, still seeing each other, still interacting. But the meaning behind those actions has changed. The intention is no longer the same. The energy is no longer the same. And that difference is what you feel, even if you cannot explain it immediately. The truth is, real connection does not leave you in a constant state of doubt. It does not make you question where you stand or whether you still matter. When something is real, it feels clear. It feels stable. It does not require constant interpretation. And once you begin to recognize the difference between presence and connection, you start to see things more clearly. You stop holding on to what used to exist, and you start paying attention to what is actually happening now. Because staying in something that has already ended emotionally does not protect you. It only delays the moment you accept reality. And while accepting that reality may feel uncomfortable, it gives you something more valuable than hope. It gives you clarity. And clarity allows you to make decisions that align with what is real, not what you wish it could be. Follow for more if you want to understand women better.